Prime Minister Pashinyan, thank you for finding the time to speak to us. I suppose the obvious thing to ask you is about the peace process with Azerbaijan. It's now about 5 months since Azerbaijani forces took full control of Nagorno-Karabakh. Since then, there's been discussion of peace. President Aliyev has talked about being ready for a peace deal that would formally end 30 years of conflict, but nothing seems to happen. Where are we with that? What is the delay?
Նախ պետք է արձանագրել, որ միջազգային
It's important to note, first of all, that in at least 3 international formats, at least is not the right word, in 3 international formats, the principles of peace have been agreed upon between Armenia and Azerbaijan. The first time it happened was in 2022, on 6 October in Prague, during the Trilateral meeting, which was attended by the President of France, Emmanuel Macron, EU Council President Charles Michel, President of Azerbaijan, Ilham Aliyev, and myself. And after long discussions, we adopted a joint statement. We adopted a joint statement which notes the following principle, that Armenia and Azerbaijan recognize each other's territorial integrity on the basis of the 1991 Almaty Declaration. What that means is the Almaty Declaration is about the following, and it was signed prior to its signature still, or sometime prior to its signature. 12 Soviet republics were a part of the Soviet Union, and they signed the declaration. And by signing the declaration, they fixed a few things. Firstly, that the Soviet Union ceases to exist, and these republics, as they became sovereign states, recognized each other's territorial integrity, inviolability of their borders, and sovereignty. So with this, with the Almaty Declaration, the administrative borders that existed between the Soviet republics became state borders. Why am I putting it this way? Why am I saying this? Because the Almaty Declaration states that these republics accept the existing borders, whatever borders existed at that time. They agreed to recognize the inviolability of these borders. And of course, there's a very important subtlety here I want to highlight. After the signing of the Almaty Declaration, the declaration and the package related to the declaration were ratified by the Armenian parliament in 1992, by the parliament of Azerbaijan later. After signature and ratification, many events occurred. But in this context, it's very important to note that in Prague on October 6, with French President and EU Council President, and in their presence, Armenia and Azerbaijan, after all those events, reiterated that they recognize each other's territorial integrity on the basis of the Almaty Declaration. And the second important point is that the Almaty Declaration must become the basis for the demarcation and delimitation of the borders between the two countries. So, demarcation and delimitation. And this is another very important principle, which in this context means that a border need not be created in the demarcation process between Armenia and Azerbaijan, but the borders reiterated, or borders agreed upon in the Almaty Declaration must be reiterated on the ground and in the maps. And that's the first fundamental agreement. After that, on October 30, a trilateral statement between the Russian president, President of Azerbaijan, and myself was signed. And in that trilateral statement, Armenia and Azerbaijan, in writing, accepted that they recognize each other's territorial integrity, sovereignty, and they declare that they renounce the use of force, they refuse to use force or the threat of force, and they will solve all issues through negotiations. And this understanding, this agreement, among others, was the basis for formulating the third fundamental principle, which implies that the opening of communications in the region, the deep locking, and the opening of roads for one another will happen in the framework of respecting the sovereignty and integrity of countries, and alongside the first two principles, that principle on May 14 and July 15 was reiterated as a result of trilateral meetings in Brussels. Now, all these documents I referred to are public. How is all of this related to your question? Here's how. Հայաստանի եւ Ադրբեջանի միջև խաղաղության պայմանագրի The architecture and principles for a peace agreement between Armenia and Azerbaijan have been agreed upon, and at the end of last year, it seemed to us that we were very close, finally, to a final text of agreement to be agreed upon. But at first, Azerbaijan 3 times refused to participate in negotiations in different formats, after which in Azerbaijan they scheduled a presidential election. So we are at that point, and I presume after the presidential election we will be able to achieve the implementation of these points, provided there is political will. I can tell you, I can note that the government of Armenia, as in the past, has that political will to move towards peace in our region, and specifically to sign a peace agreement with Azerbaijan on the basis of the aforementioned agreements.
That all sounds fairly positive. But then
I'm sorry, but the fact that we've lost so much time is not really a positive sign. Because look, in May, or rather on the 1st of June perhaps, in Chisinau, there was a 5-side meeting attended by the President of France, the Chancellor of Germany, EU Council President, President of Azerbaijan, and myself. With the 5 parties, it was agreed, and this was published in writing, that the next meeting in that format would take place in Granada in the fall of 2023. But then Azerbaijan refused basically to take part in that meeting, and in that context, the statement was that the next meeting would happen at the end of October in Brussels in a trilateral format, and then again Azerbaijan refused to attend that meeting. And if you add to that the events that occurred in Nagorno-Karabakh, firstly, military strikes upon Nagorno-Karabakh and the ethnic cleansing that left Nagorno-Karabakh without Armenians. It was fully cleansed of Armenians. So in direct, I was answering your direct question. Would they focus on its essence, on its substance? But then why did I interrupt your remark about that sounding positive, because when these events are seen side by side, there are some analysts in Armenia, for instance, who think that all of this indicates that Azerbaijan is step by step refusing and walking away from the agreements reached among us and in international platforms.
So let me come to my next question, which was what I was getting to. So I think it was on January 10th, President Aliyev gave a television interview, and he said a few interesting things. He did say that I'm paraphrasing here, but I think I'm paraphrasing fairly. He did say that the national project of reclaiming Azerbaijani territory was complete, and therefore he seemed to imply that there was no further barrier to peace in principle. But he also went on to say that if he saw any sign of Armenia rearming, he would take military action against Armenia. He renewed his demand for a so-called a Nakhchivan transport corridor via Armenian territory. He ruled out retreating from areas inside Armenia as strategic heights that his troops have occupied, saying that he needs those areas to keep an eye on Armenian intentions. And then he rejected your proposal to draw the borders based on the last published Soviet military maps, saying that he would rather talk about the early period of Sovietization because Azerbaijan lost a lot of territory then. Now, people I've spoken to, including people who work for your government, have told me that they frankly think that is laying the basis for a claim on Armenian territory, not just on Nagorno-Karabakh, but that he intends to go further and possibly to prepare, if not a full invasion, then claims on your territory. Is that what you think is happening?
Իհարկե այդ գնահատականները գոյության իրավունք ունեն.
Of course, those opinions have the right to exist. One may not say that these assessments are groundless. And the statements made by the President of Azerbaijan in early January 2024 in his interview with Azerbaijani television media, I publicly have said this is a blow to the peace process. And as I described a few moments ago, that blow is not just a standalone process. It began firstly with the ethnic cleansing in Nagorno-Karabakh, secondly the refusal to take part in the Granada meeting, and then the refusal to take part in the Brussels meeting, and then the subsequent refusals to attend meetings. But also want to note that I recently responded to those statements by the President of Azerbaijan, and I need to state once again that having an army is each country's sovereign right, and the Republic of Armenia, just like any sovereign state, has the right to have a strong and combat-ready army, with the position that the Republic of Armenia is creating an army for fortifying its territorial integrity, sovereignty, and independence. And our political position has been that we recognize the territorial integrity of all the countries in our region, and we expect the same from all the countries in our region, especially as there is a signed, adopted document about it. When I refer to the Prague Quadrilateral Statement, that's exactly what the Prague Quadrilateral Statement is about. To speak of territories at the time of accession to the Soviet Union, well, I'm sorry, but I think that discussion of the time period of becoming a part of the Soviet Union is not relevant at all in this context, because, as I said already, in trilateral and quadrilateral formats in writing, we have stated and confirmed the agreement and understanding between Armenia and Azerbaijan that the two countries recognize each other's territorial integrity on the basis of the Almaty Declaration.
Do you fear, but forgive me.
And go ahead.
I'm just trying to get to the point of it. I understand why you would disagree with all of those claims, but do you fear that's what he's doing?
Yes,
I'm not disagreeing with the statements. I'm referring to the documents. And if Azerbaijan's statement is that they don't recognize any document they have signed and adopted, they must publicly state that.
But do you?
In other words, as I said, I know that there are analyses of those interviews and so on and so forth, implying, and I could also make a political assessment, and I'm also saying that there is analysis according to which Azerbaijan is stepping back from the agreements it has reached. But then, so long as Azerbaijan has not declared that it is withdrawing its signature from the Sochi and Prague declarations, then it's very clear that Armenia and Azerbaijan recognize each other's territorial integrity based on the 1991 Almaty Declaration, and any statement that contradicts this logic is not legitimate.
Do you fear a third war between Armenia and Azerbaijan?
Գիտեք, վախը ճիշտ բառ չի օգտագործելու համար, որովհետև
Fear is not the right word, to use.
Հայաստանի Հանրապետությունը
Because the Republic of Armenia is a democratic and developing country, and the Republic of Armenia, as I said already, is implementing wide-scale reforms for improving our country's resilience. By the way, in recent years, I think that the international community and our society have seen that our country's resilience has been improved significantly, and we continue the path of reform towards further improving Armenia's resilience. As to regional destabilization and steps in that direction, of course, anyone with common sense would have such concerns.
Anyone with common sense would have such concerns about a possible future war. Is that what you mean?
Could you repeat that?
You mean, if I understood the translation rightly, anyone sensible would have concerns about that? You mean it is reasonable to be concerned about the danger of another conflict?
Well, you see, it's very important that in all the interviews, fine, good interviews, good statements, but then it's very important that we note that this is a relationship between states. It's an interstate relationship. Our relationship, even though we do not have diplomatic relations, I'm required to refer to the documents we have signed, to rely on these documents. And as I said, we have a document signed with Azerbaijan on the non-use of force and the non-use of threat of force. And if we look at it with this logic, and if Azerbaijan were to not respect the documents it has signed, then Azerbaijan might as well attack any country. Why just Armenia? You look at around Azerbaijan, if they were to not respect their international commitments, then look around, they could attack any country that is its neighbor.
Understood. So
if that were
So sorry to bang on about this, we'll move on to another thing, but the basic question really is, okay, you've got these international commitments, but do you trust President Aliyev to keep those commitments? That's the basic question, isn't it?
Գիտեք, ես հավատում եմ Աստծուն։
I put my trust in God, and I think that every country that respects itself must follow the commitments it has undertaken.
You've said, I think you repeated this just recently, just this week perhaps, that Armenia can no longer rely on Russia as its main defense and military partner. I think it's pretty clear why. You feel that Russia failed to live up to its commitments under the Collective Security Treaty Organization. What does that mean in practice? Is Armenia seeking future NATO membership?
Գիտեք, մենք չենք ասել, որ ժխտում ենք եւ
You see, we have not said that we deny and reject cooperation with Russia in general, and in the security sector in particular. What we've said is we intend to diversify our relations in the security sphere. What does that mean? Does that mean that in the security sphere we are going to rupture our relations with Russia? No, it doesn't mean that. But it means that we stand ready and we intend and we are discussing and we are working in the security sector to establish relations, for example, with the EU, which is now by and large happening with France, which is already by and large happening with the United States, which is by and large happening with the Islamic Republic of Iran, which is by and large happening, and with India, which is by and large happening, and so on. I mentioned the EU and the number of countries with which we are discussing. The US, France, India, or the EU, and our security relations with them obviously are not targeted against Russia. They're simply noting the reality that the security relations that we used to have, that we had in the past, do not provide for our security needs. As to NATO, this is not an item in our agenda. NATO membership is not a question we have discussed or are discussing. We do have with NATO a partnership. There's no news about this. We used to have the IPAP, Individual Partnership Action Plan, and we currently are reformatting it to a certain partnership format which does not imply membership. And let me tell you something else. Well, first of all, at least de jure, we are currently a member of the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, and I'm not sure, or rather, there are some discussions in Armenia as to whether or to what extent the alliance-based strategy is consistent with Armenia's longer-term interests.
I mean, you say you're not turning your back on Russia, that you're not kind of making a choice, but that's not realistic, really, is it? In today's world, those countries you listed, closer relationship with France, with the United States, with the European Union, they're in a massive geopolitical confrontation with Russia. In reality, you've got to choose, haven't you?
Well, look, the Ukraine war had just started at the time, and I believe it was an interview by with the Czech CNN where I said, in the Ukraine situation, we are not Russia's ally, and that's the reality. But I want to also tell you that with the US or France or other partners, our security cooperation is not targeted against our other security sector partner. Now, our partners may have concerns that the relationship with them or how the relationship with them could influence their security agendas. And that's an issue we're trying to manage by utmost transparently speaking with our partners about their shared agendas.
As part of your realignment, we say, or embracing other security structures, you joined the International Criminal Court, I believe it was on February 1st or January 31st. Armenia formally joined the Rome Statute. The International Criminal Court has issued an arrest warrant for Vladimir Putin for war crimes allegedly committed in Ukraine. If Vladimir Putin came to Yerevan, would you arrest him?
Գիտեք, նախ ես ուզում եմ ասել, որ
I would like to first of all state that the Republic of Armenia initiated the process of joining the Rome Statute in December 2022, and that decision was due to our assessment of the changes in our security environment, and we ratified the Rome Statute based, among other things, on the analysis of the consequences of the 2022 September war, having found that in our security systems some gaps have emerged, some cracks have emerged. In that sense, we ratified the Rome Statute as an additional factor contributing to elevating Armenia's security. And the ratification of the Rome Statute, I understand that there was a difficult time period. It was a difficult time period, and that's why we took that decision. And that decision serves to improve the level of security of Armenia. As to the legal subtleties, I cannot at the moment carry out legal analysis because that's more the job of the lawyers. And as I said, Armenia, as a responsible state, must remain committed to all of her international commitments, including the commitments that it has in the relationship with the Russian Federation and commitments that the country has in international relations. And by the way, on that topic, there have been different opinions expressed and different legal analyses. There are quite a few lawyers who say that current heads of states, by virtue of that status, enjoy immunity, and that immunity cannot be overcome. So I mean, this is a legal issue. It's not a political question for me to discuss and for me to answer.
I mean, yeah. It's not that subtle, though, is it? There's an arrest warrant that says Vladimir Putin needs to be arrested for war crimes. You're obliged to do that. So if he comes to meet you, for example, are Armenian police going to have to arrest the president of the Russian Federation and send him to The Hague?
Let me break a secret to you. After 2018, Armenia has had extensive democratic reforms, and I don't decide whom to arrest and whom not to arrest. There's a legal order in Armenia, established in Armenia. There are legal institutions, and in all cases, Armenia's legal institutions are the ones that take those decisions. That's why we have a prosecutor's office, that's why we have courts, and that's why we have an investigative committee, and so on and so forth. And it's very important that, being a member of the Eastern Partnership, the Republic of Armenia stands apart in terms of institutional reforms of having an independent judiciary. The Republic of Armenia has the rule of law. In Armenia, the Prime Minister has his powers, and those powers have never, under any circumstance, included the determination of whether this or that person should be arrested or should not be arrested. All of that is done by legal procedures.
I understand. I mean, that could put you in a slightly awkward position, couldn't it? I mean, would you have to, say to Vladimir Putin, listen, Vladimir, just don't come, because I can't promise you that you won't be arrested, that's entirely up to my police and
Ես
courts.
չեմ կարծում թե
It's pretty awkward, isn't it for you?
Ես չեմ կարծում թե
I don't think that Vladimir Vladimirovich needs my advice.
You say, look, we are not, our new cooperation with the West is not in any way directed at your other security partner, Russia. The Russians shouldn't have anything to worry about. We're just diversifying, all of that, which sounds very conciliatory. But this is an anonymous but supposedly high-ranking Russian government source speaking to TASS, the government agency, in October, quote, "We consider Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's speech at the European Parliament on October 17th, you remember, as absolutely irresponsible and provocative, especially as far as Russia and Russian-Armenian relations are concerned. Quote, we see how Armenia is trying to turn into Ukraine number 3, if we consider Moldova as Ukraine number 2. Pashinyan is following in Volodymyr Zelensky's footsteps by quantum leaps." Now, if I were you, I would be pretty worried about that kind of rhetoric coming from Moscow, given what Moscow has done to Ukraine.
I really like to comment quotes after I've read them, with all due respect, third sources. I mean, my political experience has shown that. But generally, to continue answering your previous question, here's what I would tell you. As I've obviously said in my statements made in front of the European Parliament, we cooperate with the EU and our relationship with the EU is deepening. And by the way, I want to draw your attention to a very important fact. In our region, in recent months, a very significant event has happened, and that significant event, regardless of how people feel and regardless of the political assessments, because the attitudes and political assessments could vary, but our direct neighbor and friend, Georgia, has become a candidate for membership in the EU, and that, essentially, I think, for Armenia, is a very significant thing for Armenia to position herself accordingly based on that development. And I had the opportunity to congratulate my Georgian counterpart and the people of Georgia on this important event. And I think that's an event that will inevitably also make an impact on the overall picture and environment in our region. And the Republic of Armenia and our government will need to position ourselves accordingly towards that event. There's one thing I can tell you, and it was obvious from what I said. I congratulated Georgia, the government, and the people of Georgia, so it's obvious. I consider that to be a positive event. Otherwise, why would one congratulate them?
EU ascension one day is something you want to take the country in that direction. That's a reasonable.
Direction, one would have to clarify what direction means, because
setting it as a goal eventually.
Before I became Prime Minister, Armenia and the EU signed Comprehensive and Enlarged Partnership Agreement, SEPA, and that agreement is currently being implemented, and it's obvious that the Armenia-EU relationship is growing deeper, and it's obvious that the Armenia-EU relationship is growing deeper, among other things, through the implementation of the SEPA agreement. But then it's also obvious, on the other hand, that the Armenia-EU relations are growing deeper also because the international community's assessment is that we've made visible progress. We've had visible success in implementing democratic reforms. This is an important subtlety for understanding our reality and where we are and many of the events that unfold in Armenia. We're not turning away from anyone. You see, we're exercising the messages we've received from our people, and that message is primarily about democratic reform and democracy and democratic reforms
հանրության զարգացումը
And the development of a democratic society are for us not circumstantial agendas or ad hoc agendas. I've said many times this is a strategy for us. And in my speech before the European Parliament, I stated that we will continue to carry out, to implement these reforms. And I stated that the Republic of Armenia stands ready to be as close to the EU as the EU sees possible.
I mean, I mean, forgive me for really pushing this question. The reason I was asking you about the kind of sharp Russian reaction to your, join the ICC and you move to the West is because Armenia sits in
But the question is, whose reaction? Whose reaction did you say?
Oh no, the quote I read you from the anonymous Russian official earlier. The reason I was,
but I'm sorry, your quote, that source, the Russian official, anonymous, you said? Did you say anonymous?
It says, yes, it's from TASS.
Well, but I'm sorry then. I'm sorry, you don't even have to send us the link because I don't think that the Prime Minister of the Republic of Armenia should be commenting anonymous sources. Can you imagine how many anonymous sources there are?
Yes.
If we started to...
Okay. I understand. I mean, it's a state Russian news agency. It's used to send a certain message. And messages are sent to international relations, but the reason I'm not.
If the source is anonymous, that means it's not really sure of what it's saying.
Perhaps, but look, the reason I'm bringing up those things and those sharp questions is because look, you are in a pretty
I like sharp questions.
place. I mean, the geography of Armenia, where you are in the world, all right, you are. Whether you like it or not, you do have to cope with the fallout of this, of the Ukraine war and this big confrontation between Russia and the West. You've also got a border with Iran. We're seeing a war, in Gaza and Israel, which threatens to turn into a wider Iranian-Israeli confrontation. All of those things kind of overlap here in the South Caucasus. How bad could things get here? Do you worry about those interlocking international crises that kind of meet in this region turning into some kind of conflagration?
Sorry, which country are you from?
I'm from the United Kingdom.
Well, look, unfortunately, in the UK and in all the European countries, there are deep concerns, and I participate in the summits of the European political community with open doors and behind closed doors. We have had discussions of the international situation. I don't know of a country in the world, at least the countries, the leaders of which I interact with, I don't know of a country which would not have serious concerns over its security. Why am I saying this? Two reasons. First of all, I don't want this interview to leave the impression that the security challenges in Armenia are considerably more critical than those in many other countries around the world. But on the other hand, I don't want to leave the impression that the government of Armenia is not comprehending the criticality of the security challenges of Armenia. Do you understand my point? I've spoken with leaders of many European and not just European countries. In all the countries, the security challenges exist because we're living in a world where no one may say what will happen tomorrow morning. No one can tell what will happen tonight. And so that is the whole logic of the modern world. And if we also look at globalization, and that the world has really shrunk. Look at what's happening around us in the Ukraine, in Israel,
ծովային ավազաններում մեր մոտակա ինչա կատարվում։
In the sea basins around us, look at what's happening, and then so on and so forth. Nobody may sit back and relax. And what I'm thinking, and what I'm noting is, on the other hand, if anyone were to think that in any global world they are more relaxed or they should be any more relaxed than the government of the Republic of Armenia or the citizens of Armenia, they would be significantly wrong. Secondly, those challenges you describe, and I'm saying this with full seriousness, in the last 2 years and currently, the international community is discussing whether or not there will be a nuclear war. And my position is such that I have interactions with several potential sides to such a nuclear war. I think I know what a serious topic it is. In that sense, at least, Armenia is significantly safe, more secure, because I don't think anyone is intending to blow a nuclear strike upon Armenia. But then there are many countries, I'm not sure they should feel, or they do feel as, I'm not sure they do feel as secure. The reason I'm responding to you in this manner is I want you to understand me correctly. What's very important is to understand that in many countries, they're not more secure than we are in Armenia. And from a different perspective, the Republic of Armenia, according to the latest ratings, in terms of internal safety, domestic safety, Armenia ranks as number 7 in the world. So you're sitting now in the 7th safest country in the world, which is not bad, I think.
If I may, I mean, what I'm getting at is kind of, okay, what's your message to my readers, to the government ministers who read kind of my newspaper? Because in this world, which, as you say, is seriously discussing the chances of a nuclear war, in this world where, as you say, we just can't predict what is going to happen tomorrow.
Here's what I would, the message I would convey to your readers. I know how hard it is. I know how difficult it is and what difficulties need to be overcome. And I will do my best for peace to be established in our region. And I will perform that share of the work that concerns us. And I'm hopeful that the other countries in our region will do the same. For some of our partners, we have some confidence that they will do that. And for others, there isn't so much confidence, but one of the core goals of our foreign policy is that, and we've entitled that policy regionalization, so that in our region we can achieve peace.
Well, thank you very, very much for talking to us, Prime Minister.
Thank you.
Thanks for being good sport.